Hinds.
Oh, that's it.
Good morning. Didn't acknowledge my dad either. Or David out there.
Yeah,
What's he doing out there? Just being here.
that's right. Well, it's cool out there, I guess.
That's pretty cool in here. I like it.
I guess it's nice.
Oh, yeah.
Y'all are quiet. Making it sound like it's time to start class or something. I still have 1 more minute.
1 minute.
30 seconds. Come on in. Saw Mike Garcia walking around without a walker or any help. So you're getting stronger. All right. We are finishing up our study of Acts. We are in chapter 25 this morning, and we have observed that once Paul goes to Jerusalem in chapter 21, verse 17, all of this material is closely knit together. One event gives way to the next one. Paul had stood trial before Felix, the governor of Caesarea, who was not a particularly good man. Remember why he kept Paul in prison after the trial? Was it because Felix believed that Paul was guilty? No. He wanted money. He wanted Paul to bribe him to get out of prison, and Paul didn't do that. He stayed in prison for 2 years. Felix was deposed as governor, and in came a new one, Porcius Festus. We're going to see this morning, of course you know the answer already, we're going to see if he's any better than Felix. These are worldly men, they're Romans, high up in social status. Caesarea is on the coast, but it's in Judea, and it's the provincial capital, the Roman provincial capital. We would say Jerusalem should be the capital. Well, the Romans put it on the coastal city, and here we go with Paul's defense before Festus. Now, 2 years have gone by, and Festus is just starting. But he has to reopen the case, and the reason why is because the Jews who hate Paul have been waiting for an opportunity to get Paul. So let's take a look. What we're told is that after 3 days, Festus arrives in Caesarea, in the province of Judea, and he goes up to Jerusalem. And of course, we would say, wait a minute, you should go down to Jerusalem, because Caesarea is up here, Jerusalem's down here. But we understand they're talking about elevation. Jerusalem's built on a hill. And you're going to see references to Jerusalem several times in these verses. So I've got 6 on the screen here, just to point them out, just to show you that Jerusalem is mentioned prominently. Paul will say, when I was at Jerusalem, referring back to Acts 21. And so look for those as we go through them. And something I haven't mentioned at all is there are actually 2 different forms of the word Jerusalem. One is, we might call it the Jewish form, and then there's a Greek version of it. Yes. Which form we see here in Acts 25. It's a Roman audience. They're using the Greek form of Jerusalem. Just a little subtle thing, but this is all from Roman eyes, a Roman perspective. And so even when Paul is talking to them, he uses the Greek term for Jerusalem. So what are they doing? He's going up to Jerusalem from Caesarea, and that's when the chief priests get a hold of him. And they lay out their case against Paul. So here's the new governor, just came to Caesarea, just came to the province, and he's hit by these religious leaders in Jerusalem saying, hey, you've got this guy in prison, and we want him extricated to Jerusalem. First thing right out of the bat. And what's his response? I'll look into it. Yeah, I need to finish this here, don't I? They urged him, asking as a favor against Paul that he might summon him to Jerusalem because they wanted to give Paul a fair trial. No, that's ridiculous, isn't it? They were planning to ambush him, to kill him. Now, have we heard that before? We sure have. 2 years earlier, the Jews made a plot. I love this. They bound themselves to not eat or drink till they had killed Paul. 40 men. This is back in Acts 23. How many of those men are still alive, I wonder? Can you go 2 years without eating or drinking? We're never told what they did. It said, well, I guess we better start eating after all. I want to go back over this chart before we continue in Acts 25, and I'm going to give you the first couple. So Paul arrives in Jerusalem in Acts 21, verse 17. Then, in chapter 23, I'm leaving some stuff out. In Acts 23, verse 11, Jesus tells Paul, you will go to Rome. What's next? I'll go and give that to you as well. The Jews in Jerusalem know that Paul is going to be taken to Caesarea, and so they plot to assassinate Paul along the way. How did that plot get found out? Paul's nephew hears of the assassination plot. You see how one event leads into another. What's next? The tribune starts making plans to deliver Paul from Jerusalem to Caesarea under heavy, heavy guard. But before he actually leaves, what does he do? He writes a letter. The tribune, Lysias, writes a letter to Felix, the governor. And what does he basically say in that letter? One, he says good things about himself. Makes himself look good for Felix, the governor. But what does he say about Paul's guilt or innocence? He's innocent. But I'm sending him to you under the cloak of darkness because of this plot. And so Paul arrives in Caesarea. What comes next? He stands before Felix. So who comes first, Felix or Festus? Remember, it's only after the wound gets bad that it festers. So Festus is after Felix. Okay, whatever. And then, so Paul's now in Caesarea. He made it safely. You got to speak up. That's right. That's when they say, he's in Caesarea. No way we can get to him under heavy, heavy guard. But when he's traveling back from Caesarea to Jerusalem, we'll get him then. Does Paul ever leave Caesarea and go to Jerusalem? He does not. Why not? Because Paul knows what they're planning. He knows he's vulnerable along the road. And he does what to make sure he does not go back to Jerusalem from Caesarea? He's going to go from Caesarea to Rome. What does he do to make sure that happens? He will appeal to Caesar. We will see that today. He first has to stand Festus and then appeal to Caesar. And then Festus hears him in the passage we're going to be looking at this morning, Acts 25. And Paul will appeal to Caesar. We will see that firsthand. And then Festus will say, I don't know what to charge this guy with. And he gets his buddy, King Agrippa II, to help him out with charges. That's a lot. You know all this. You know all of this. Isn't that great? You're able to look at these exciting last 7, 8 chapters and go, this is fun, and I understand it. I know what's going on. In case we had to dust off some cobwebs. At least I did. I sure did. So there they all are in order. And we, right now, are at number 8. The Jews plot to bring Paul back. Next will be he will stand before Festus. Festus replied that Paul was being kept at Caesarea and that he himself intended to go there shortly. So, said he, let the men of authority among you, you religious leaders, go down to Caesarea with me. And if there is anything wrong about the man, well, bring charges against him. They've had a hard time bringing charges against Paul. They finally did in chapter 24, and Paul refuted every one of them. It's all circumstantial. In fact, Paul insists there are witnesses who can tell you none of the things they said about me really happened. So we looked at the first 5 verses, and what we're going to do now is continue as Paul begins talking with Festus. So let's take a look at verse 6. And
You muted yourself, Mark.
say that?
You muted it.
Nobody wants to hear me anyway. Okay. I don't think I've ever done that before. It's the first time for everything. Can I tell you all a little secret? Boy, if this doesn't come true, I'm really going to have egg on my face. We're going to have a baptism this morning. And like so many people who, they don't want anybody to see, they don't want to come forward and all that. She's going to wait till after services. But you'll know this, okay? It's our little secret. Don't tell anybody. But her name is Aurelie. And we're real excited about that. Okay. I mean, isn't that what it's all about? People obeying the gospel. All right. Paul appeals to Caesar. That's going to happen right here. And it starts off by saying, Festus, he stayed among them 8 to 10 days. He goes to Caesarea, and the next day, he took his seat on the tribunal and ordered Paul to be brought. He's keeping his word, isn't he? This may be a pretty good guy. And the next day, he took his seat, brings Paul in, and when Paul had arrived, the Jews who had come down from Jerusalem stood around Paul, bringing many serious charges against him that they could not prove. Now that's Luke's commentary on this, but we saw that already in Acts 24. Charges that they could not prove. Do they have witnesses to come forward and say, I saw Paul bring a Greek into the court of the Jews where no Greek is allowed? Do they have a witness come forward? No, nothing like that. And so in verses 8 through 10, we see Paul make his defense. That word defense is a legal term. He is standing before a tribunal. That is a legal term. There's a lot of legal terminology in these chapters. This is a court proceeding. We've already had it. Here we are again. We're in a court of law. And the judge, jury, and executioner, you're talking to him. Paul's talking to him right now. And this is what he says in his defense. Neither against the law of the Jews, nor against the temple, nor against Caesar have I committed any offense. Case closed, right? There are no witnesses, and Paul is countering it. But Festus, and I'm sure this is very condensed, but it says that Festus, wishing to do the Jews a favor, maybe this guy isn't so good after all. He said to Paul, do you want to go to Jerusalem and be tried on these charges before me? Because that's what the Jews wanted. They wanted Paul to go from Caesarea to Jerusalem. Why? So that Paul could have a fair trial in Jerusalem? To ambush him, to kill him on the way. They didn't get him from Jerusalem to Caesarea. They want to get him from Caesarea to Jerusalem. And this is what Paul says. I am standing before Caesar's tribunal where I ought to be tried. Not there. Not against this kangaroo court down there. I am standing here before Caesar's tribunal. This is where I need to be. Continuing verse 10. To the Jews I have done no wrong, as you yourself know very well. You know this, Festus. I haven't done anything. If then I am a wrongdoer and have committed anything to which I deserve to die, then all right. I need to die. He's not trying to evade punishment for a crime he's committed. He's saying, I'm innocent. But if there is nothing to their charges against me, no one can give me up to them. I appeal to Caesar. And that also is a legal term, a legal phrase. Appealing is a legal term. Is Paul a pushover? Paul is standing up for himself. Now, did he stand up for himself before the Jewish council, the Sanhedrin council? Oh yeah, he did. He called the high priest a whitewashed wall. He defended himself. Did he defend himself before Felix and Festus? Yes. All right. Jesus, our Lord, stood before the same bodies, the Jewish Sanhedrin, different people, but the same body. And did Jesus defend himself? No. They finally get him to declare, I am the Son of God, and he passes judgment on them. When Jesus stood before the Judean governor, what did Pilate say? Why aren't you talking to me? Do you hear what they're saying about you? Why aren't you defending yourself? And Jesus said, you don't have any authority except what God's given you. So they're the ones who are at wrong here. Jesus didn't defend himself, but Paul does before the governor of Judea, Felix and Festus. Is it wrong of Paul to defend himself when Jesus didn't?
Well, two different criteria. Jesus was God. Paul was a man.
Okay, explain that. What do you mean?
Well, when you have to look at things, Paul, Jew of Jews, knew the law, knew it very well, was approached by Jesus Christ himself.
Yeah, Acts 23:11.
Have a good understanding. Paul had two very viable, good bits of information the rest of the people didn't have. One, he knew Jesus well. Jesus knew him well. Paul was associated with Jesus in so many different ways, but Paul was still just a man. But he defended himself with God's help through Christ.
Okay, I like that a lot. He defended himself. Paul defended himself with help and support from God and Jesus. Yes, sir.
There were two different goals for the mission. Jesus knew that he
Okay.
must die and take the sins of the world with him.
And what is Paul's mission? So Jesus' mission was to die on the cross. What was Paul's mission here?
To get to Rome.
To get to Rome. And I've mentioned this verse a couple of times already. In Acts 23, verse 11, Jesus said, hey, Paul, take courage, for as you have testified to the facts about me in Jerusalem before Felix and the Jews, you must also testify in Rome. What is Paul doing? Is he just going through the motions of a court, or is he actually trying to preach the gospel at every opportunity he has? What did he do with Felix? He preached to him. He preached to him and his wife Drusilla, we saw last week. He had one-on-one sessions with them. They didn't obey the gospel. What is he going to do with Agrippa in Acts 26? He's going to try to convert the guy to Jesus. We're going to see that. In fact, Acts 26, I'll say this, it is my favorite courtroom scene, and I think it is one of the most important chapters in Acts. Everything has been leading up to this confrontation where Roman wisdom is going to clash with Jesus and him crucified and raised from the dead. Acts 26, we're going to look at that next week. Well, Paul has appealed to Caesar, and the response from Festus is, to Caesar you have appealed, to Caesar you shall go. This concept, this legal term, is going to be brought up 4 times in total. We're going to see it again in verse 21 here in just a minute, and then also in verse 25. When Paul had appealed, and then Festus will say to Agrippa, he himself appealed to the emperor. So we're going to see that here in just a moment. All right, everybody with me? We just looked at 12 verses in about 20 minutes. That's more than one verse a minute. We better pick up speed here. So Festus, true to his word, opened the case against Paul, offered to let Paul go to Jerusalem, and he says, I appeal to Caesar. Festus has a problem, though, doesn't he? He knows Paul is innocent, but he's got to send him to the emperor. What are the charges he's going to bring against Paul? This is a real problem for him. Well, being the new governor, the king of several provinces, several areas, King Agrippa, he's got the title. He's not really a powerful king, but he and his sister are visiting the new governor. Whether they were friends prior to this, we're not told. Maybe they were, but be that as it may, Agrippa and Festus are awful chummy. And so it says, when some days had passed, this is verse 13, when some days had passed, Agrippa the king and Bernice, should we just call her Bernice? We'll just call her Bernice, arrived at Caesarea and greeted Festus. And as they stayed there many days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, there is a man left prisoner by Felix, and I was at Jerusalem, and when I was at Jerusalem, the chief priests and the elders of the Jews laid out their case against him, asking for a sentence of condemnation against him. One of the things I find very curious is how Luke, the author of Acts, is repeating a lot of information for us that we've already read. We've already seen this. Everything that Festus says to Agrippa, don't we already know? He was left a prisoner by Felix. The chief priests and the elders laid out a case against him in Acts 24. They wanted to condemn him. We've already seen this. What's going on? Why is Luke repeating this information? Emphasis. There are times when, a few days, weeks, months, even years can be just glided over very quickly from one verse to another. Here he slows down the narrative even more. 8 to 10 days, many days. What's Paul doing in the meantime? The whole time they're having fun and talking and doing stuff day after day after day. What's Paul doing? He's incarcerated. He's probably playing on his new iPad or something. Yeah, one of the things we do know is that Paul kept working. He was under house arrest, especially when he gets to Rome. But here in Caesarea, he's given some freedoms as well. He stays in Caesarea for 2 years with Felix, was given a lot of liberties, and it seems that Paul was writing letters. So some people believe, some scholars will say, well, Paul wrote Philippians, I'm trying to get the order right. He wrote Ephesians, Colossians, Philemon, maybe here in Caesarea during that 2-year imprisonment. Probably wrote Philippians later in Rome, because he talks about the Praetorian Guard. Be that as it may, Felix and Agrippa are having a good time, but they're also concerned about the charges. I answered them, verse 16, I answered them that it was not the custom of the Romans to give up anyone before the accused met the accusers face to face and had opportunity to make his defense, there's that legal term again, to make his defense concerning the charges laid against him. Does that sound like another judicial system you know? I would dare say most judicial systems in their codes of law would say this. But our judicial system is very much based on the Judeo system, the finest judicial system the world had ever seen. And the Romans picked up on a lot of similar concepts. I don't know if they got it specifically from the Jews, from the Old Testament. I would doubt that. But they've got a great judicial system as well. They've got their courts of law. They've got their proconsuls and their tribunes and their governors. And Paul is standing trial. If Paul is going to be accused of heinous crimes, then his accusers need to come and make those accusations face to face. Well, they did. They had opportunity to make his defense, or he had the opportunity to make his defense concerning the charge laid against him. We just read about this. Here he is still talking and talking and talking about stuff we've already seen. So when they came together here, I made no delay, but on the next day took my seat on the tribunal and ordered the man to be brought. He's still not done. When the accusers stood up, they brought no charge in his case of such evils as I supposed. I mean, I'd been told horrible things about this guy. They come in here and I'm listening and saying to myself, huh? That's it? That's all you got, Jews? I'm paraphrasing. Rather, they had certain points of dispute about a certain Jesus. So they're disputing about their own religion. Remember, this is from a Roman perspective, looking at the Jews. Does Festus know much about the Jews? No. Felix did. Agrippa really does. Why does Agrippa have such great knowledge about the Jewish people? Who was his great-grandfather? Who was King Agrippa II's great-grandfather? Herod the Great. He knows all about the Jews, all about their history, and he knows about Jesus because his, I guess, great-uncle, Herod Antipas, is the one who played a hand in Jesus' crucifixion. So next week, when we start studying about Paul standing before Festus and Agrippa, who is Paul going to be directing his sermon to? Not Festus. I mean, doesn't mean he's ignoring Festus and everybody else. Who is he going to address repeatedly in Acts 26? Agrippa. Festus doesn't know anything about Jewish history. Agrippa does. And listen to what Festus says, and this gives way to his ignorance, his incredulity. I mean, they're arguing points about their own religion and about a certain Jesus who was dead. Agrippa, you sitting down? You ready for this? Paul asserts this Jesus guy is alive. It's easy to slip or just kind of glide over. But that's really the crux of what's going on here. In these closing chapters of Acts, the courtroom scenes are all about the resurrection of Jesus and the hope of Israel. And we'll see that hope of Israel brought out next week a lot. But the resurrection of Jesus is front and center. And in the case of Festus, what does he think about the idea of this Jesus person being raised from the dead? What does he think? He doesn't give it much credence. In fact, it sounds to me like he thinks it's just foolish. It sounds like Paul needs to whip out a copy of 1 Corinthians chapters 1 through 4 and say, hey, you need to read this. Because what is 1 Corinthians 1 through 4 about? How what the world says is wisdom is actually foolish. And the foolishness of God is wiser than men. And what's at the heart of his discussion? The resurrection of Jesus. That's what chapters 1 through 4 of 1 Corinthians are about. Paul's already written it, but he couldn't show him a copy, and I don't know that he would have read it anyway.
Mark,
Yeah.
I don't want to go too far afield, but
Well, two things. One, it was not possible. Once you appealed, you have to go. Two, Paul didn't want to. He wanted to go to Rome. So the first kind of cancels out the second, I guess. He appealed to Caesar. This is a serious decision on Paul's part. Earlier in Acts 23, Paul asked this question. So all these chapters go together, 21 through 26. And Paul asked this question: why do you guys think it's so incredible that God raises people from the dead? It was at the heart of his discussion back in Acts 23 with the Jews, and it is now the heart of the discussion here. We need to understand and appreciate the resurrection of Jesus. This morning in the sermon, we're going to talk about the two on the road to Emmaus. And Jesus had just died on the cross, we would say a couple days earlier. Friday, it's now Sunday morning. Now they say 3 days, counting Sunday, Saturday, Friday. It hadn't been that long, just the day prior. And they were dejected, discouraged, despondent. Why? Jesus is dead. We thought he was, we hoped he was really the Christ. Guess he's not. But what is it that changed their mind? The resurrected Lord. We need to see and understand who Jesus is. And I hope our lesson this morning will help with that a little bit. We need to re-examine why we believe Jesus is, in fact, the Christ, the Son of God. All right, we're almost done with this. Being at a loss how to investigate these questions, he's still not done. Festus is still talking to Agrippa. Being at a loss how to investigate these questions, I asked whether he wanted to go to Jerusalem, and he tried and be tried there regarding them. No. When Paul had appealed to be kept in custody for the decision of the emperor, I ordered him to be held until I could send him to Caesar. Now, this has been a big, long spiel on Felix's part. Do you see that in your Bible? How many verses this is? And the whole time, you know what Agrippa's saying? The whole time, yes, yeah, tell me more, yes. And so when he tells him, I need some help here, Agrippa says, I am your man. I would like to hear the man myself. And that's when Festus tells his new buddy Agrippa, tomorrow you will hear him. The stage is set, and we are going to go ahead and finish the chapter, which is setting up the next day, when Agrippa and his sister Bernice are brought into the hall. I want to tell you a little bit about Agrippa and Bernice. They are siblings. Their other sibling is Drusilla, that we saw in Acts 24. Drusilla was 20 years old when she got to hear the Apostle Paul. She's married to this Felix governor. Agrippa and Bernice, they are rumored to be more than just siblings. This is a sordid family. Bernice will actually become the mistress of two Roman emperors in the future. And they're in their 30s when this is happening. She will become friends with Vespasian. And what was his father's name? But two Roman emperors. Titus, I think that's right, Titus and Vespasian. And then when Vespasian became emperor, he sent her away, got rid of her as a mistress. And she falls from history. Agrippa and Bernice are brought into the hall. I want us to read the pomp and circumstance here. So the next day, Agrippa and his sister Bernice came with great pomp And they entered the audience hall with military tribunes and the prominent men of the city. Let me ask you, if Paul had not been imprisoned, would he have ever had an opportunity to stand before the governor of Caesarea, Festus, King Agrippa II, military tribunes, and prominent men, powerful men in the city of Caesarea, and preach the gospel to them? This is all part of God's plan. In fact, when Paul is in Rome, what is he going to do? Is he just going to not talk to the soldier who is watching him, or the soldiers that are watching him under house arrest? Remember Ephesians 6, 10 through 18? It talks about armor. It sounds a lot like the pieces of armor for a Roman soldier. You know, Paul says, I'm writing about you. I'm writing about you right now. We have no idea. But he says, this has opened doors of opportunity to let me preach to people. Isn't that amazing? And so Paul is finally, at the command of Festus, brought in. Can you see the scene? All the pomp and circumstance for all these dignitaries. And then here comes Paul. He's ragged. He doesn't look good, doesn't smell good. They bring him in. And Festus said, King Agrippa, and all who are present with us, you see this man about whom the whole Jewish people petitioned me, both in Jerusalem and here, listen to this, shouting that he ought not to live any longer. This Festus guy, he's pretty good. But I found nothing that he had done, nothing deserving death. And as he himself appealed to the emperor, I decided to go ahead and send him. Verse 26, but I have nothing definite to write to my Lord about him. Who is his Lord? Caesar. And I don't know why Nero is never named, but he is the emperor during this time. He was emperor from 41 to 54 AD. No, Mark. 54 to 68 AD, excuse me. 54 to 68. And so this is all happening around AD 60, 59, 60. I have nothing against him. I don't know what charges to bring against him. Therefore, I have brought him before you all, and especially before you, my new buddy, King Agrippa, so that after we have examined him, I may have something to write. For it seems to me unreasonable in sending a prisoner not to indicate the charges against him. And that's where the chapter ends. Chapter 26 begins with high drama, where Paul is given this fantastic opportunity to give his defense. There's that word again in chapter 26, verse 1, as well as verse 2. Defense, a legal term. Paul's defense before Herod Agrippa II, the king. And that's where we'll be next week. All right, we got a few minutes. What are your thoughts about Luke, about Paul, about the courtroom scene that's unfolding before our eyes?
One thing I was seeing is, I remember way back in the 60s, used to watch these movies about Roman soldiers and kings and pomp and circumstance.
Yeah.
You can hear the trumpets, letting all the people know who's coming together. And then we see Paul right in the middle of this, a Jewish man, a Pharisee of Pharisees in Jerusalem, in that area. And to bring a man like that into a government so high up that it's amazing that he was standing.
So who's behind all of this? Who's calling the shots, arranging things? That the Romans think they are. They're calling the shots, but who's really calling the shots? That is the Lord Jesus. That's what we've seen all throughout Acts. Any other thoughts? Otherwise, I'm going to let y'all go and start gossiping. resume your gossiping. Yes, sir.
Usually at a trial, they bring in character witnesses.
Right. Okay.
Why would Peter and his disciples not be there as character witnesses?
I don't know. That's a good question to think about. In fact, Luke will be with Paul in Acts 27. And because of the we statements, we know Luke is with him. And I'm sure some of these other fellows who came to Rome with him would have. But in fact, since you mentioned that, and I'm going to close, I'm going to let you all out early. Make up for all the times I didn't. 2 Timothy 4, this is Paul's last letter. He's under Roman imprisonment a second time and is apparently executed. But he says in 2 Timothy 4, verse 16, at my first defense, no one came to stand by me. So that goes to exactly what you're saying. All deserted me. So there's your answer. Paul felt deserted. May it not be charged against them. But then what does he say in verse 17? 2 Timothy 4, verse 17. But the Lord stood with me and strengthened me, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed, and all the Gentiles, all those Romans, might hear it. So I was rescued from the lion's mouth. There's a lot of lessons we can learn from these chapters. This Wednesday night, when we make our applications, the material's already out in the foyer. We're going to talk about Paul's sermon in Acts 24. We will talk about Acts 26, the following Acts application. So this Wednesday night, we're going to talk about Paul's 3-point sermon and how we can apply it to our lives today. Thank you for studying Acts 25. I'm really looking forward to Acts 26 next week. Materials out in the foyer.